When I opened my husband's briefcase, I didn't expect to find a box that would destroy everything I thought was real. A small box, wrapped in plastic, glowing under the light. Proof that the man I loved had been loving someone else. That was the exact moment my heart turned to glass and started to crack. Before I begin, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Stories that show what betrayal really feels like. The briefcase was heavier than usual. Adrian Cole always carried it like it was an extension of himself. Sleek black leather, the kind that smelled like old money and pride. I was packing it for his upcoming business trip when I saw it. A small red box tucked between his folders. My fingers hesitated. I pulled it out slowly. Durex, strawberry flavored. Brand new, manufactured last week. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my ears. The air around me seemed to thicken, like even the walls didn't want to hear what came next. Maya, have you seen my phone charger? Adrian's voice floated from the bedroom, calm, casual, like nothing in the world was wrong. It's in the second drawer, I replied, my voice calm enough to surprise myself. While he rummaged around, I turned the box in my hands again. Brand new, unopened, useless to a marriage that hadn't seen intimacy in months. Adrian walked out, already dressed in a tailored navy suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. His tie was perfectly aligned, his shoes gleaming. He looked every bit the successful Seattle entrepreneur he was. Charming, confident, admired, and completely hollow. Packing for me again? He smiled. Yes, I said. You're flying to Los Angeles tomorrow, remember? I slipped the box back into the inner pocket of his briefcase, covering it with wet wipes. I added wipes for the heat, I said smoothly. He chuckled, kissed my forehead. You're the best, sweetheart. That kiss, cold, polite, perfunctory, felt like an insult now. For 2 years I had convinced myself our marriage was simply going through a phase. But phases end, lies don't. As he went back to the bedroom, I sat on the sofa staring at my trembling hands. When had he stopped touching me? 3 months ago? 6? I couldn't even remember. Whenever I reached out, he turned away. I'm tired, he'd say. And I'd believe him, because love makes fools out of us all. By the time I walked into the kitchen to start dinner, the numbness had turned into something sharp. A slow burning awareness that everything I'd been living was a performance. The sound of the knife chopping vegetables echoed too loudly. The perfect home, the perfect husband, the perfect mask. Adrian came out, adjusting his watch, talking about some new project he was about to sign. His voice filled the room, confident and practiced. I nodded at the right moments, smiled when he looked up. No one would have guessed that beneath the table, my nails were digging deep into my palms, carving little crescents of pain. My flight's early tomorrow, he said with a soft smile. Think I'll sleep early tonight? Of course, I said, every inch the supportive wife. When he went into the shower, I put on rubber gloves and started washing the dishes. The clinking of porcelain was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. My mind was strangely calm, frighteningly calm. That red box had turned into a tiny poisonous seed in my brain. I dried my hands, walked quietly to the storage closet, and found a half-empty bottle of drain cleaner, sulfuric acid. I stared at it for a long moment before grabbing an old syringe from our medicine drawer. My reflection in the microwave door looked unfamiliar. Hollow eyes, steady hands. Adrian's briefcase sat by the front door. I took out the box again, pierced each individual packet with the syringe, injecting a few drops of the acid into each. The holes were almost invisible. When I finished, I put everything back neatly, as if nothing had ever been touched. He came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, his voice casual. You don't look so good. You okay? I'm fine, I said, smiling, just tired. Later, after he fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off, listening to the clock tick. My chest ached, but my mind was crystal clear. The betrayal had stopped hurting. Now it was evolving into something else. I turned on Adrian's laptop, opened his cloud drive. The password was still our wedding anniversary. How ironic. Inside was a folder labeled private. I opened it. Hundreds of images. At first, they looked like random photos. Then my eyes froze. Renee, my sister in law, my brother in law Julian's wife. Renee's face stared back at me, wearing nothing but lingerie, posing on hotel beds, sometimes with Adrian's hand boldly resting on her waist, or worse. The most recent picture had been taken last week, the background, the same Hawaii resort where Adrian and I had spent our honeymoon. My breath hitched, my vision blurred. They had chosen that place deliberately, to mock me. I closed the laptop, went out onto the balcony, and lit a cigarette. Something I'd quit years ago because Adrian hated it. The night was cold, the smoke sharp against my throat. It didn't matter. I felt alive again, painfully, beautifully alive. At 2:07 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Mrs. Cole, this is St. Mary's General Hospital. Your husband and another woman were just admitted. Their condition is critical. I froze. Another woman? Yes, the nurse said softly. She is listed as a Miss R. Cole. Both have severe chemical burns. You should come immediately. For a second, everything went silent. Then I heard a man shouting in the background, voice raw with grief and rage. Adrian, you bastard, how could you do this to me? It was Julian. I stared at the wall, calm as the sea before a storm. I'll be right there. I got dressed, even applied light makeup, and called a cab. As the car sped through the sleeping city, neon lights flickered across my face. I almost laughed. Strawberry flavor, Renee's favorite. Now they would never have to worry about protection again. My heart was like ice at that moment. A flash of sadness as I considered the innocence that had been lost in the cause of revenge.
When I reached the hospital, the air smelled of blood and disinfectant. People were screaming, nurses running, alarms beeping, chaos everywhere. But inside me, there was only silence. The kind of silence that comes when you finally stop being the victim. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed because what happens next will make you question how far love and betrayal can really go. The taxi dropped me off at St. Mary's General Hospital. The fluorescent lights above the entrance flickered like tired eyes, watching me step into the scene of my own twisted justice. The hallway was crowded. Police officers stood outside the emergency room, trying to calm a man who was shouting, wild-eyed and broken. "Adrian, come out and face me," he screamed. His voice cracked on every word. "You were my brother!" It was Julian Cole, my brother-in-law. His shirt was stained with blood, his tie hanging loose, his face contorted in pain. For a moment, I just stood there, watching him. He didn't even notice me until a nurse rushed past, whispering, "We need Mr. Cole's family to sign the consent form." Julian turned toward me, his eyes red. "Maya, you're here." "What happened?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly even. He laughed, a sound that wasn't laughter at all, but something torn between disbelief and despair. "You really don't know? Your husband and my wife, they were in a hotel room together. The police said there was acid in the—" He choked on the rest, collapsing into a chair. A nurse touched my arm gently. "Ma'am, we need you to sign for Mr. Adrian Cole's surgery. His injuries are severe." I nodded and followed her. Behind the curtain, the air was thick with antiseptic and the faint, nauseating smell of burned flesh. Adrian lay on the gurney, his face pale, his body twitching in pain. The lower half of him was covered in gauze, soaked in blood. "The burns are extensive," the surgeon said quickly. "We need immediate consent for surgery. The acid caused full thickness damage to his lower abdomen and genitals." For a brief second, I almost pitied him. Almost. Then I remembered Renee's photos, their hands, their smiles, the way he had said, "You're the best, sweetheart." My voice was calm. Do whatever you can to save him. As he leaned closer, his eyes fluttered open, his voice was hoarse. Maya, I can explain. Shh. I smiled softly, my face inches from his. It's going to be okay. The doctor injected something into his IV. His eyes rolled back, and before he slipped under, I whispered into his ear, my voice sweet, my words venom. It's okay, love. It's not like you were using it anyway. The curtain closed, machines beeped, and I walked out like nothing had happened. Outside, Julian was still sitting in the hallway, his hands trembling as he clutched his head. The hotel called me, he said, his voice dull. They said my wife was screaming. When I got there, she was lying on the floor, still clutching that damn red box. I could have told him I knew exactly what was inside it. Instead, I sat beside him, letting silence do the talking. After a while, a nurse came running. We need a guardian for Ms. Renee Cole. She's going into emergency surgery. Internal injuries are severe. Julian looked at me helplessly, his face pale. I'll sign, I said. My hand didn't tremble once as I wrote my name. Renee lay unconscious, her face ghostly white. The doctor spoke quickly, his tone clinical. We'll need to perform a full hysterectomy to stop the internal bleeding. There's significant damage to her uterus. A wave of cold satisfaction swept over me. She had always loved reminding everyone she was younger, prettier, and more fertile. Not anymore. When I walked back to the hallway, Julian was gone. The hospital doors burst open, and a tall, stern woman stormed in, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Maya, where is my son? My mother-in-law, Margaret Cole, elegant as ever, wrapped in fur despite the warm night. Her eyes, however, were not elegant. They were filled with accusation. I didn't move. He's in surgery. She grabbed my wrist so tightly it hurt. You're his wife. How could you let this happen? That one sentence, that one blame, snapped something inside me. I pulled my hand free, my voice low and sharp. Maybe you should ask your son what he was doing in a hotel room with his brother's wife. Her expression froze, and just then the surgeon walked out. Mrs. Cole? He asked. The surgery went as well as it could. We had to remove a portion of his organ. His fertility will be affected. The world seemed to stop for a heartbeat. My mother-in-law swayed. Then, in a trembling voice, she hissed, This is your fault. If you'd been a real wife, he wouldn't have looked for another woman. I almost laughed. You're right, I said, tears rising perfectly on cue. But that woman was Renee, Julian's wife. Her color drained from her face. And just then, another surgeon emerged from a different operating room. Miss Renee Cole's surgery is complete. We removed her uterus entirely. She won't be able to conceive or engage in sexual activity in the future. Margaret gasped, covering her mouth. Julian, who had just returned, let out a broken cry. The hallway filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of his sobs and the doctor's fading footsteps. I stood there, hands clasped, eyes lowered, the perfect image of a devastated wife. Inside, I felt something dangerously close to peace. When the police arrived later, Margaret rushed toward them. This must be kept quiet. You hear me? It was an accident. I stepped forward, feigning innocence. If there's a problem with the contraceptives, shouldn't the manufacturer be investigated? The officer nodded. We'll run tests. And just like that, the perfect cover story was born. The next morning, when Adrian woke up, The first thing he asked wasn't about his mother. It was, "How's Renee?" "She had a hysterectomy," I said gently. "She won't be having children." His face twisted in pain, not for himself, but for her. Something in me hardened forever. He tried to explain, his voice weak. "It's not what you think, Mena. She came to me for help. Julian's company was failing." I smiled softly. "I believe you. Just rest, okay?" He sighed with relief, completely unaware that the woman sitting beside his bed had already stopped loving him.
They say truth sets you free, but the truth I found didn't set me free. It buried me alive. 2 weeks after the hospital incident, our house felt haunted, not by ghosts, by silence. Adrian had been discharged but moved slower than a shadow. He avoided mirrors, avoided me, avoided everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. He stayed mostly in the guest room now. I pretended not to notice when he winced walking past me or when I heard him cry quietly behind closed doors. The doctor said he'd recover physically, but emotionally, that was another story. And mine was just beginning. One night while he slept, I unlocked his phone using his fingerprint. Old habit, one I'd learnt after years of subtle betrayal. There were no new messages from Renee. Of course not, she was still in recovery, and her husband had filed a divorce within days of the accident. But there were messages from an unknown number, saved only as L. Most were short. "Can we meet this weekend? He misses you. You promised you wouldn't disappear." I clicked on the most recent one. It was sent 3 days ago. "He keeps asking for his father. What do I tell him?" My breath hitched. His father! A slow, cold realization crept up my spine. The next morning, I told Adrian I had a meeting at work. In truth, I went to visit someone I hadn't seen in 5 years. Detective Aaron Voss. He was a private investigator I had hired once, long ago, to check if my ex-boss was stealing company funds. He'd found the proof in 3 days. When I walked into his office, he was leaning back in his chair, cigarette in hand, same tired eyes. "Maya Cole, didn't think I'd ever see you again. What's the job?" "I need you to find someone. A woman named Leela Hart. She has a son, and I think my husband might be the father." He raised an eyebrow. "You're sure you want to know?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He nodded, scribbled a few notes, and said, "Give me 72 hours." Those 3 days felt like a lifetime. Adrian acted as if nothing had happened. He even tried to smile sometimes. He'd started therapy. He said it was helping. Meanwhile, I watched him from across the kitchen table, pretending to care, memorizing every twitch of guilt that crossed his face. On the fourth evening, Aaron called. "He's found her. Leela Hart. Lives 2 towns over. 34 years old. Works at a preschool. Has a 5-year-old son named Leo." My stomach twisted. "Anything else?" "Yeah." He hesitated. "The birth certificate lists the father as Adrian Cole, but the record was sealed after a court petition. You want photos?" I closed my eyes. "Yes." He sent them within minutes. When I opened them, my heart stopped. The boy, Leo, had Adrian's eyes, the same dark grey with flecks of hazel, the same half smile that used to melt me. But it was the woman beside him that made my blood run cold. She wasn't Renee. She wasn't some random stranger. She was our former housemaid, Leela. She had worked for us for nearly 2 years before she suddenly quit, saying she was moving closer to family. That was 6 years ago. I remember how Adrian had insisted we give her a generous severance. I thought it was kindness. Now I saw it for what it really was: guilt. My hands shook as I scrolled through more photos. Leela at the park, Leela holding her son, Leela smiling beside a man who looked nothing like Adrian, probably the man who believed he was Leo's stepfather. But in every picture, Leo's face screamed the truth Adrian had buried. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat by the window staring at the rain streaking down the glass, each drop a memory I didn't want. By morning, I knew what I had to do. When Adrian came down for breakfast, he looked tired but calmer. You didn't sleep again, he said softly. No, I was thinking about forgiveness. He looked up startled. Forgiveness? Yes, I said, smiling faintly. For everything. That evening I told him I wanted to take a drive together, to clear our heads, maybe start fresh. He hesitated, then nodded. The GPS led us to a small suburban neighborhood filled with pastel-colored houses and trimmed hedges. Adrian frowned. Where are we? I parked the car and looked straight ahead. A woman stood in her front yard helping a little boy ride his bicycle. Her laughter drifted across the street like sunlight through glass. Leela. Adrian froze. His knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. Maya, his voice broke. What did you do? I smiled softly. Nothing yet. He opened his door as if to leave, but I placed a hand on his arm. Look at him, I said, nodding towards the boy. He's beautiful, isn't he? He even has your smile. His eyes filled with tears. Please, don't. Don't what? I whispered. Don't acknowledge your son. Don't admit what you did while I was pregnant with our daughter. He shook his head violently. I didn't know, Maya. I swear. She told me she was leaving town. She never said she was pregnant. Oh, but you did know, I said. You paid her off to disappear? And she did. Until now. For a moment, the world went utterly still. Then quietly, I said, Do you love him? He looked at the boy again, his son, and whispered, Yes. That one word was enough. I started the car again, the engine purring softly. Good, I said, because now you'll get to see him every week, from a distance, behind glass, after the police finish with you. His eyes widened. What? I held up my phone, showing him the photos, the birth certificate, the messages. You lied on legal documents. You falsified financial records to pay her off through your company's charity fund. That's embezzlement. His face turned white. Maya, please. I broke your body, my trust, and my life, I said, my voice trembling but cold. Now I'll break yours the same way, piece by piece. He reached for my hand. I pulled it away. When we got home, I walked straight to my study and sent every file Aaron had found to our lawyer, the same lawyer who'd handled Adrian's last promotion. By morning, half his accounts were frozen, and the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Adrian sat on the couch staring blankly at the wall. You ruined me, he whispered. I looked at him for a long time before saying, No, Adrian, you did that yourself. Outside, the rain had stopped. But inside me, the storm had just begun.
Revenge has a rhythm. First, it whispers, then it burns, and by the time it stops, there's nothing left standing. By the end of the week, Adrian's empire began to crumble. His company's board suspended him pending investigation. The media picked it up within hours. Respected architect accused of fraud and infidelity. I didn't need to leak it myself. The world loves scandals, and this one had everything: money, betrayal, and tragedy. When the news broke, my phone buzzed nonstop, friends pretending to care, reporters pretending to be kind, even my mother-in-law Margaret pretending to forgive. I ignored them all. Adrian, meanwhile, stayed locked in the guest room, drowning in guilt. He barely ate, barely spoke. He looked like a ghost wearing his own skin. And I let him rot there. Until one evening, there was a knock at the door. I opened it and froze. Renee Cole stood on my porch. She looked different. The soft, glossy-haired woman I once knew was gone. Her face was gaunt, her eyes shadowed, and her voice barely more than a whisper. Maya, she said, we need to talk. I wanted to slam the door, but curiosity won. Come in. She stepped inside slowly, every movement careful, almost painful. She said, I heard what happened. About Adrian. About the child. I folded my arms. What do you want? Her lips trembled. You think you're the only one who lost something? They told me I'll never have children. Do you know what that feels like? Yes, I said flatly. It feels like justice. She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. Maya, please. You have to believe me. Adrian told me he was leaving you. He said you were cold, distant. I thought he loved me. I laughed, a hollow sound. You thought? He told you whatever you needed to hear to keep his ego alive. You were just convenient, Renee, nothing more. She shook her head violently. No, you're wrong. He did love me. He said we'd start a family after the divorce. My smile faded. And how's that plan working out? Her face crumpled. She turned toward the door. You're cruel. I stepped closer. Cruel? You slept with your husband's brother in my marriage bed, and you call me cruel? For a long second, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, You'll regret this, Maya. You think you've won, but you don't know what he's capable of. When she left, I stood there, staring at the door, her words echoing in my mind. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that my revenge had awakened something darker. The next morning, I found out what. The police arrived just after sunrise. 2 officers at my door, their expressions grave. Mrs. Cole, we have a warrant to search the property. For what? I asked, pretending to be calm. For evidence related to the hospital incident. My heart froze. They searched every room, every drawer, every box. When they reached the garage, one of them held up a small metal case. Inside, bottles of the same chemical compound that caused the acid burns. I stared at it, genuinely shocked. That's not mine. The officer gave me a long look. It was found in your car trunk, ma'am. Adrian stood at the doorway, pale and silent. As they read me my rights, I saw his lips move, barely audible. I'm sorry. And that's when it hit me. He had planted it. At the station, they questioned me for hours. I kept my voice steady, my story consistent. I told them I had nothing to do with the acid, that it was a defective product, that I'd been at home the night before. They had no proof, no footage, no witness, just the chemicals. Eventually, I was released on bail. When I got home, the house felt colder than ever. Adrian was sitting on the couch, hands clasped. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would you do that to me? He didn't look up. Because I lost everything. My career, my family, my future, and you. He met my eyes, and his voice turned venomous. You took pleasure in it. I laughed bitterly. You ruined yourself, Adrian. All I did was show the world the truth. His face twisted. You want me gone, Maya. Fine, but I won't go alone. If I burn, you burn too. For a moment, I thought he might actually hurt me. His eyes were wild, desperate. Then he stood, walked past me, and slammed the door behind him. Hours later, I got a call from Aaron, the investigator. You need to see this, he said grimly. He sent me a photo. Adrian, sitting in a car, talking to Renee. She was holding an envelope. Blackmail? I asked. Aaron hesitated. More like a deal. Looks like they're working together now. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. 2 people who had destroyed my life, now teaming up to finish the job. But they had forgotten something. I'd already lost everything once. And a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of enemy. The next morning, I visited my lawyer. We drafted a statement for the media. Mrs. Cole denies all allegations and will pursue defamation charges. Then I called Aaron. I need you to follow them. Every move, every meeting, record everything. He did. Over the next week, he sent me footage, secret meetings, whispered plans, envelopes of cash changing hands, and one video that made my blood turn to ice. Renee and Adrian were sitting in a cafe. She leaned across the table, saying, "Once she's charged, we'll move the money offshore. You'll be free." Adrian nodded. She'll never see it coming. I replayed that clip over and over until my rage turned into something sharper: purpose. By the end of the day, I had everything ready. Copies of the recordings, financial documents, witness statements, all carefully delivered to two places: the police department and the local news station. The story aired that same night. The headline read, "Ex-husband and mistress exposed in fraud and blackmail scandal." By morning, they were both trending, and this time, they were the villains. Adrian was arrested for tampering with evidence, Renee for obstruction and fraud. When the police took him away, he turned to me one last time, his voice breaking. "Was it worth it, Maya?" I didn't answer. I just watched him go, watched the man who once promised forever disappear behind flashing red and blue lights. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without nightmares. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I'd finally stopped caring.
If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.